If you're new here, hi, I'm Etrem, and I'm a really good player at Area 88 and UN Squadron. Not only is UN Squadron one of the best licensed video games ever made, it's one of the very best examples of shooting games, period. Especially the Dai-Pro and Capcom Super NES conversion. On the original Mud Prince channel, longtime viewers are sure to remember my thoughts on the matter. And both UN Squadron and its Japanese counterpart Area 88 were constantly in rotation as part of our weekend streams. I've put so much time into it, I can literally beat it single-handedly, without dying. In many circles, the Super NES version is generally accepted as superior to its original arcade version. Or is it? Well, now we have an original PCB to put that to the test. Today on Bullet Tengoku, we're taking a look at Area 88 on Capcom PlaySystem 1. UN Squadron, known in Japan as Area 88 after the source manga by Kaoru Shintani and its subsequent anime series of the same name, is a horizontally scrolling shooting game developed by Dai-Pro and published by Capcom. It would see release to arcades on Capcom PlaySystem 1 hardware, or CPS1 for short, worldwide in 1989. A number of European microcomputer ports were developed and published by US Gold in Europe. While these ports do somehow stay fairly faithful to the source material, and the Atari ST version in specific does actually have a passable visual style, they're all frankly pretty dire in terms of sound and performance. Thankfully though, the Super Famicom and Super NES port that we all know and love would see release in all major territories: July 26 for Japan, September 1991 for North America, and December 1992 for Europe and Australia. But it's the original arcade version we're going to take a look at today, which resides on the multi-level CPS1 arcade board complex. The Capcom PlaySystem, known today as CPS1, started development in 1986, created with the suspicion that consoles were becoming a legitimate source of competition for arcades. CPS1 was designed to cut down the cost of hardware, allowing arcade operators greater flexibility with interchangeable ROM boards. CPS has three main components. The first of these is the A board, which houses the main processors, RAM, and sound drivers. The A board has multiple variants but will generally support any CPS1 game with some exceptions. The B board, which is where the game itself is stored, has a number of sockets that interface with a series of masked ROM chips, EEPROM chips, or combinations of the two. Finally, the small C board, which itself is installed onto the B board, contains a custom video logic chip and sometimes additional I/O, like this one found on Mercs. Moreover though, the C board is also sometimes used for copy protection by way of on-chip memory and a so-called suicide battery. Of course, as history has come to prove, this was more or less a near-complete failure. Only a small handful of CPS1 games had such a battery, and thankfully, Area 88 isn't one of them. The first game to see release on CPS1 was Forgotten Worlds in 1988. Area 88 would be the sixth a year later. It's a really cool looking system, but can be prone to failure in a few ways, and it can be hard to pin it down. This original C board I got, for example, was not able to properly display the graphics from various banks. A fresh replacement fixed the issue, but the same issues could also have come from either the A board or the B board. Simply put, original arcade hardware can be real finicky, and CPS1 can be some of the most temperamental there is, making it more of an intermediate hardware type. But enough about that, let's get into arcade Area 88. The game flow in Area 88 is vastly different than that of the Super Famicom or Super NES version of the game. All three playable characters from the manga and anime are here as they would be on console, but their attributes are different as they're locked to their own specific plane, which can't be changed. Shin flies the F-20 Tiger Shark and is generally the weakest in terms of overall strength. He obtains a more balanced assortment of air-to-air and air-to-ground armament and is the fastest in terms of maneuverability. Mickey has a greater emphasis on air-to-air combat, though he's no slouch against stuff on the ground in his F-14 Tomcat. Generally, Mickey will have a greater assortment of missiles and powerful enhanced air-to-air armaments, all with more ammo to boot, but moves slower than Shin. Finally, Greg pilots the A-10 Thunderbolt II, also more famously known as the Warthog. With twin gun angles, Greg can engage stuff in the air and on the ground at the same time, though his air-to-air special weapons are much less emphasized than his air-to-ground stuff. Despite this, Greg has some really cool weapons, like the ring laser. He's generally the strongest of the three, though his A-10 is of course the slowest of the pack. Before setting off, McCoy will give the player the opportunity to purchase special weapons and defensive measures. Each stage has different weapons that match the objective at hand, which does a better job at giving the player a heads up as to what might be coming next in the stage ahead. While this loadout might change from plane to plane depending on the mission, they still do a good job of balancing the stage at hand. For example, if the next mission is in the air, air-to-air weapons will be the focus. If a lot of stuff is ground-based, stuff like freefall bombs will be queued up instead. While the level of choice is way more restricted both by mission and character, at the very least, you'll never be left with something that just doesn't work well for the upcoming battle. Between the options available, upgraded, more powerful versions are also typically present for a higher cost, with special weapons dealing more damage and defenses allowing for more hits or damage to be taken. Regardless of the stage, there is always an option to get through with a little less difficulty, so long as you've got enough cash to purchase what's needed. But special weapons aren't the only way to boost your power. Many of the enemies you'll face will be red instead of their normal color. If these enemies, or formations of enemies, are dealt with entirely, a power capsule will appear that, when collected, will grow the player's primary fire both in terms of destructive power and size. The POW value in the player's top corner of the screen represents how much power is left to the next level, while the total, unsurprisingly, shows how many have been collected so far. The color of these power capsules will also denote different values: green for 1, blue for 2, and gold for 4. Collecting enough will power your guns up to a maximum level of 7, at which the POW value will reach double love. Even leading up to this though, there are ways to squeeze more damage out of what you have. This is because, while the rapid fire at play here is pretty decent, a fast button tapper can overdrive the fire rate to greater than that available by default. On a modern stick, 30 Hz is killer. Area 88 plays over the course of 10 core stages. These stages follow a specific order, with the exception of a special extra stage that occurs randomly somewhere in the middle of it all. It should be noted that this stage is Area 88 exclusive. The arcade version of UN Squadron in specific lacks this stage. This makes the arcade version a lot more methodical than what would eventually make its way to the Super NES and Super Famicom, as players more or less have to deal with specific challenges at specific or approximate specific power levels, rather than saving harder stages for when more power has been built up. As is the case with many shooters of its kind, the end of the stage is punctuated with a huge boss encounter, often sporting complex, fast fire and tricky trap patterns that can really do a number on your chosen plane. This can make things challenging, as in Area 88 the player does not have a life stock, but rather just a single life bar. Once the bar is reduced to nothing, one final hit will destroy your plane and it's game over, with the option to continue with another credit. Well, if the board's dip switches are set up for continues, that is. This life gauge can be increased by adding an extra fuel tank to your plane before the mission begins, and with the option of adding a shield to the mix, survivability in any given stage is pretty decent. Some stages also have hidden fuel pods, which can be a godsend if things aren't going especially well. Of course, understanding the game's hitboxes will also allow most players to get through a lot of the game, and find more than a few safe strats as a result. What's really cool about Area 88 is how your plane's hitbox is wide, but very narrow. This means that you can line yourself up to various graphical bits in the background to really sneak in under a ton of hostile stuff without worrying about getting hit at all. Meanwhile, your own shot collision zones are quite a bit thicker, meaning that you can often hit targets while chilling in a zone where shot angles won't cross you. Considering many of the shooters of the era had fairly chunky ships with hitboxes to match, the skinny ones overlaid on real-world planes here are a breath of fresh air. I won't call the game easy, but it's probably not as hard as many people would lead you to believe. Granted, I will admit that experience from the Super NES version clearly facilitated a normal difficulty 1 credit clear in less than 5 hours total time, but with no extends and extra help only available with built-up cash between missions, I can see how Area 88 might be a little on the unforgiving side if you're going for that uninterrupted victory. With no extends, the score in Area 88 is really just a matter of prestige. The higher the score, the cooler you'll look on the ranking screen between the attract sequences. Obviously, destroying as many enemies as possible will result in pretty good scores, and boss bonuses are decent in size, so just making it as far as possible alone should be more than enough for a great ranking. Hidden Mobi-chans can also boost the score a bit, in addition to enabling some secret weapons. But then there's money, which is quite a bit more important. Once again, clearing as many enemies as possible and killing off bosses means cash in the bank. But maintaining some of your special weapon stock, making it through with an intact shield, or not dying with a belly tank installed can net money spent back into your usable funds. This will absolutely help in damage dealt and survivability in later, harder stages. It's really nothing complicated. This is an arcade game from 1989 after all, but at the time, the separate money and scoring elements would have been pretty fresh. If all you've ever played is the Super NES version of UN Squadron or Area 88, or god forbid the microcomputer versions, things are going to look a little on the strange side in arcade, but overall, more colors and more details are going to make the visual side of things really pop in general. Sure, the victory screen has very chunky animation rather than the smooth Mode 7 stuff on Super Famicom, but there's also way more going on in terms of background imagery. There's even alternate portraits depending on player performance. Giant set pieces, bright colorful backgrounds, and tons of smooth animation throughout each stage brings the world of Area 88 to life. It looks spectacular, though the later Super NES version would be no slouch in these regards. But let's be honest, where the arcade version truly shines is in its sound. Oh buddy, the soundtrack in Arcade Area 88 is really something else. To be completely fair, I do have a soft spot for the Super NES soundtrack, but the arcade soundtrack is undeniably better. It just sounds so much more serious. There's not a single track that the Super NES does better. Well, except the battle with the Forest Fortress, I'll give it that. Many of these pieces would be rearranged and used in different spots in the Super NES version, while others would be dropped entirely and replaced with all new music. Overall though, the arcade version wins it. Being a JAMA arcade board with a whole bunch of dip switch banks, it's not surprising that Area 88 also has an extensive test suite that can be accessed through the A board, or through specialized inputs on a supergun. Among various inputs and graphics tests, a full sound test is also available, giving you that excellent raw CPS1 sound. But that brings us to the other side of things. The game we'd end up getting at home was a very different game than the one in arcades, and the first major difference is that each pilot flies the same plane to start, instead applying new unique abilities like quick power-up, extra weapon ammo, and fast recovery time to the gameplay. Here, new planes are purchased with saved up funds, starting at $250,000. This sounds pretty rough, until you realize that the cost of weapons is far less than those in the arcade version. There are also a number of special quartermaster cores that can be engaged for some quick, if tedious, cash. Hidden bonus stars are also worth $50,000 a piece, which is not only pretty significant, but can also kind of be farmed by an enterprising or daring player with a bunch of extra lives in tow. The default Crusader is new to the game with all three of the arcade version's aircrafts available to buy, and two all-new planes rounding out the top tier of the roster, at great cost. Each of these have unique weapon loadouts too, making planning and strategy quite a bit more involved when preparing for the next mission. Which brings us to how instead of every stage following a specific order, players are now able to pick and choose which stage to take on starting in Stage 2. This means that players can tailor their run to accommodate the power levels they'll be at as each previous stage is cleared, rather than knowing that they'll have to endure a troublesome area with less power than they might prefer. None of these stages are one-to-one either. While most share similar graphical set pieces and general themes, each stage's flow and general challenge is often drastically different on the Super NES version compared to the arcade original. Additionally, there are several stages in both versions that are completely exclusive. You won't find the C-Vet or Wolfpack stage in the arcade version. You're not going to find the airbase or super weapon construction stages on Super NES. And many others like the infamous Cave stage, Battleship Minsk, and Canyon are drastically different. And, dare I say, quite a bit easier in arcade than on Super NES. But the Super NES version can be quite a bit easier than arcade due to another crucial factor, the danger mechanic. If you get hit, your aircraft will enter danger while your chosen pilot fights to regain control and deal with the fire on board their plane. If it resolves, the player's reduced life gauge will return. But if they're hit again while in danger, they'll lose a life. But there again is another form of assistance to make life a little easier. You'll start with 3 lives with the possibility of extends through scoring throughout the game. On a perfect run, it's possible to finish the game with 8 lives, meaning that 5 or more lives can be earned in an effort to finish the game. Going even further, 3 continues are also available to pick up where game over might have ended a player's run. The trade-off to all of this is, if you die, you'll be kicked out to the stage select screen where you can choose to play the same stage or another if desired, or available. This can also be abused to grind $100,000 around in money from the canyon stage, for example. Shields, extra weaponry, and health pickups like the Yashichi are also present as hidden items in many of the stages, though shields specifically are only enabled through these pickups. The biggest difference of all, though, has to be the absence of the 2-player co-op mode on Super NES. The arcade version allows for 2 players to take on the game cooperatively with on-the-fly buy-in, so help is just a credit away with a buddy in tow. The game will even adjust the amount of enemies and power capsules distributed throughout the game, allowing both players to sufficiently power up as they go. And let's be real, UN Squadron with a friend is such a good time. If I had discovered this game in arcades back in the day, I guarantee that I would have drained my parents' savings into the cab. Alright, that's not really true, but I have to say, having been given the opportunity to own this board, putting time into it, and just grinning ear to ear all the way through, I can't say that many things out there, never mind video games specifically, gave me the kind of feelings that Area 88 does, but here we are. Do I recommend you go out of your way to buy Area 88 or UN Squadron on CPS1 or Super NES? I'd say only if you love the game like I do. It's very important to me, but your personal results will definitely vary. However, and more importantly, this is a game that will never get a modern port, nor will it be collected into any compilations due to the Area 88 license behind it. To that end, a decent emulator or FPGA solution like the Mister is all you really need. From there, who knows? Thankfully, Area 88 and UN Squadron does have a spiritual follow-up. US Navy, also known in the West as Carrier Air Wing, saw recent release in the Capcom Arcade Stadium Collection on Switch, PlayStation, and PC, with another version to be bundled into the Evercade Alpha Bartop arcade cab later this year. It has many differences though, and it's something that I'm sure we'll explore at a later time, but at least there's something more to the Area 88 legacy. Area 88 is just one of many arcade boards I've amassed in the last little while, and I'm planning on featuring a number of them in various contexts as we go along. With several shmups, puzzlers, and even some fighting games, I hope you all enjoyed this look at an important flip side to one of my favorite games, and will look forward to new features starring the biggest games of my past in the future. We'll see you all again in the next feature.